Video games are art, right? I don't like saying any particular medium is art because it's just not true. Books aren't art, films aren't art, games aren't art, not as a whole, but individually, they can be. This comes down to what your interpretation of art is, but here's my stance. If there's anything art isn't, it's a product. Art is intended to express emotions. Products are intended to generate revenue, but because both are the result of skillful expression, it's easy to confuse them. This isn't a matter of good versus bad, because there are good products and there's bad art. It's all subjective. Just because something can be considered respectable art in one's eyes, doesn't mean you should hold it in high regard. I'm sure you've seen a Jackson Pollock painting or two and wondered what the allure was. People think, what's the big deal? He just splattered paint on a canvas, I can do that. Where's my $200 million? And if you view the painting as a display of skill, then yeah, it's underwhelming. But perhaps more important than skillful expression is intent. It's what you don't see. Once you start asking questions like, how did Pollock paint this? Why did he paint this? What kind of art was being produced around the time this was made? Was this technique common around that time? Then you can, hopefully, start to appreciate the painting just a little bit more. But what makes art special is that it's timeless. It doesn't expire. People can marvel at the Great Pyramids of Egypt for thousands of years, and they'll be appreciated for thousands more. But how many people will appreciate the latest Vegas casino that'll be torn down and rebuilt in a decade? Timelessness is the key element, and it's why the more video games shift to a product-dominated industry, the more the industry will suffer. If you play a gacha or any free-to-play game, anything that can expire, is that a game that you're gonna appreciate for the rest of your life? Forget the rest of your life. Is it something you'll care about the second the servers go offline? Or is it just a time-wasting activity, filler for your day-to-day mundanity? These games aren't art, they're products. Sure, a new gacha character comes out and players get excited because she looks cool, but you ever wonder why the character looks this way? Is the character drawn in a skimpy outfit because the artist thinks that design is interesting? Or is it because he has a finger on the pulse of his audience and is giving them what they want? More to the point, is it a problem to give the audience what they want? No. From a business perspective, that's the best call to make. And who am I to say something is or isn't art? People get defensive when you challenge the things they like, and a popular retort to this criticism is, well, can you do better? Let's see you make a better game. And I can't, but that doesn't mean my criticism is without merit. Since this is a product, and I'm a consumer, I can judge whether or not I like the product. You can do the same for art. It's all perspective. But at least I can respect bad art. Nobody respects a bad product. Respect doesn't pay the bills, but it's what separates good games from great games. I respect developers that follow through with their vision, that make decisions that the wider public probably won't like, but they make them anyway because of personal reasons, because they want something to be a certain way, and that's that. They don't need any other reason. Why do you need to click the stick to jump in Gun Valkyrie, for example? And why can't I rebind the controls? First impressions are important, and forcing a player to acclimate to clunky controls can be a major turnoff. But if you stick with the game, you can better appreciate the controls and gain an understanding of why they are designed this way. Movement feels so much more satisfying when you don't need to move your thumb off the stick to boost around, move the camera, and fire a gun all at the same time. It's a unique, rewarding experience that few other games mimic, because the controls aren't newcomer friendly, and modern gaming is all about being accessible. Which brings me to Bioshock. I hate Bioshock. I don't hate it because it feels like a diet version of System Shock. I don't hate it because it plays like a clunky corridor shooter. I don't hate it because it has unpatched softlocks that have existed for almost 18 years. I hate Bioshock because the same features designed to make the game accessible also made it boring. Bioshock is a focus-tested product with watered-down elements designed so that anyone and everyone can beat it, but nobody could ever truly love it. You might say I'm wrong, you might say you love the game and are prepared to rattle off 1,000 reasons why, and taken individually, there are some things to like about Bioshock. I like the underwater Art Deco aesthetic, the voice acting is of high quality across the board, both Andrew Ryan and Atlas are interesting characters, and even though the twist is lifted wholesale from System Shock 2, I think it was executed well. But judging Bioshock as a game, judging the function and purpose of its mechanics, it's a mess. I don't even think this is up for debate. Bioshock is a perfunctory shooter at best, and a poor excuse for System Shock at worst. It's a game that suffered from poor leadership under Ken Levine, whose team became swayed by data, by focus tests, rather than sticking to their own beliefs. They weren't making art, they were making a product.
Then I started to get worried about Looking Glass's sort of financial health. I and a couple other people in Looking Glass started Irrational, thinking we could keep the design aesthetic, but maybe have a more stable, try to build a more stable business platform at the same time.
The issue really stems from Ken Levine. While Ken was working at Looking Glass, he saw the writing on the wall and knew the company was doomed for bankruptcy, so he founded a new studio, where he was determined to find financial stability. AKA, he was contracted by his former employer to develop System Shock 2, which didn't sell. But that's okay, because now he was going to make games that sold more copies than System Shock 2 by being more marketable. AKA, he was just going to make System Shock 2 again, but this time, he was going to water it down so that the unwashed masses would find it accessible.
So the first idea I had for Bioshock, the team wanted to do another System Shock 2 style game, but I was very reluctant because I was the guy who had to go out and make the deals, and I knew the appetite for it because the first game didn't sell very well, wasn't very good. So I was oriented towards keeping the company alive, which was at that time very difficult to do. You had to make deals with publishers, and there had to be enough money in those deals, and if you were late or something, you can end up in really hot water, and the company was always on the brink of extinction. And it was my job to make that not go into extinct, so I pushed against it, and the team, to their credit, kept pushing for it, because I think a lot of people came to the company because they loved System Shock 2 and they wanted to make something like that.
Ken seems a pleasant enough guy, but he's not forthcoming with hard-hitting facts about development challenges. Thankfully, there's a great behind-the-scenes article by one of the project leads on Bioshock, Alyssa Finley, who spelled out in black and white why the game became what it is. She describes development as not shaping up to become what it needed to be, and how they almost cut back on object interaction, but that decision was corrected relatively quickly. She speaks of the game as if it were a product, which it is, and by extension, she's saying that the game was shaped not by what the devs wanted it to be, but by what the market wanted it to be. During beta testing, the team sent the demo to a focus group to gauge feedback, and guess what happens when you ask a group of modern gamers to play a spiritual successor to System Shock 2? They hated it. It was confusing, overwhelming, and difficult. Players had no interest in learning the systems and figuring out solutions for themselves. They wanted their hands held. Finley states, "We were making a game that wasn't taking the initial user experience into account, and we weren't thinking enough about how to make it accessible to a wide variety of players." But what does that mean exactly? It means the RPG layer was stripped, the pacing was slow to ease players into the world, which meant the first few hours were made terminally boring, and creative problem solving to navigate these environments was eschewed in favor of linear corridors. You ever wonder why Bioshock is designed so children can beat it? Why the navigation arrow and Vita chambers exist and are toggled on by default? Why there are messages that won't stop pestering you to press the hint button if you become stuck? Why the map has a giant glowing objective marker in addition to objective details written at the bottom? It's because when it comes to focus testing, you're dealing with idiots, so the devs made concessions to make it easier. I know that sounds angry and maybe a bit too blunt, but just think about it for a few seconds. None of these handholdy features improve the game. The game has quick saving, so the Vita chambers are useless. This is a carryover from System Shock, and they were terrible in that game as well, but at least System Shock only had one per floor, not one tucked around every corner. The only benefit of this system is to coddle incompetent players that repeatedly die, because enemy damage is retained on respawn. A game for mature audiences, huh? The arrow is pointless because you have a map, so why do I also need an arrow telling me where to go when I can just reference the map? Speaking of the map, the objective at the bottom spells out what you need to do, so why stamp the map with a goal marker? In fact, why even have a map at all? The levels are designed to be navigable without referencing the map, and this is in fact the superior way to play, because the map sucks. This mangled assortment of arrows pointing between different floors is confusing, and is less legible than just reading the signposts sprinkled throughout the levels. This doesn't even take into account the audio design. Characters will spell out directions and objectives for you on the radio in enough detail for you to not need an objective descriptor on the map screen. System Shock 1 relied on audio instructions in 1994 and respected a player's intelligence enough to figure things out on his own, without any objective marker, quest log, or navigational arrow. We made a development rule that future changes would be data-driven, not based solely on our own instincts. It pains me to read that statement, though I admire the honesty. In essence, Finley is stating that her team didn't make the type of game they necessarily would enjoy playing. They were conforming to the whims of the market. They conducted even more tests from analysts, advisors, and even Microsoft to ensure that they would be creating a game that appealed to a wider audience. The word accessible comes to mind in situations like these, and sure enough, Finley states, "We still had work to do to make the game more accessible." Why is accessibility bad? Well, it's not inherently bad, but by making something more accessible, you're making compromises. Features need to be removed, streamlined, or dumbed down to a level where they can be approachable by a wider group. Let's use Mass Effect as an example. Mass Effect 1 was a clunky game, with imbalanced RPG elements, bloated inventory management, and poor Mako handling. But it was still enjoyable and retains a unique charm almost 20 years later. Mass Effect 2, rather than improve on these lackluster elements, pulled all of it out and doubled down on the cover shooting, which was all the rage at the time. The morality aspect wasn't obvious enough, so now you've got glowing red and blue button prompts to belittle the player, and let him know that blue equals good guy decision, and red equals bad guy decision. The Mako controlled like crap, so let's just take that out and planet exploration along with it, and now you just harvest resources with probes from the comfort of your ship. It's a streamlined, safe, boring game that, unsurprisingly, was a bigger hit than the first. Bioshock fulfilled a similar role in relation to System Shock, except the thing it doubled down on, the shooting, doesn't feel satisfying. Your starter pistol has greatly exaggerated recoil, yet the crosshair remains stationary, and the enemies don't exhibit the kind of knockback you'd expect from a shot powerful enough to produce this kind of recoil. These guys didn't understand what's required to make the act of shooting intense and rewarding because they developed with RPG sensibilities. But when the RPG elements are removed, and you're just left with the guns, you rely on the shooting to prop up everything else about the gameplay, and it doesn't make for an entertaining experience here. This kind of shooting would be acceptable if the gameplay centered around finding creative solutions to challenges, and using shooting was just one answer, like System Shock 2. In System Shock 2, the hit detection on your melee weapons is abysmal, your guns are made of paper mache and break all the time, ammo is scarce, inventory is tight, but you know what made the game work? The level design. Levels were designed with different playstyles in mind, so even though the shooting sucked, you didn't need to rely on just shooting your way through every single encounter. Bioshock is a shooter first and foremost, and the shooting still sucks. You tossed out all of the RPG and explorative aspects, so the only thing left is the shooting. The RPG elements were present at the start of development, and you can see vestigial remnants with the worthless tonic system, but most of these systems needed to be scrapped because the focus groups didn't like them. Bioshock had initially been positioned as a hybrid RPG FPS. The decision to reposition the game as a focused FPS came later, after our initial production phase in summer of 2006, but as the game neared alpha, key people began looking more closely and saw that Bioshock wasn't on track to become an accessible and marketable game. Just about the only thing that makes Bioshock unique is the Plasmid system, which carries its own share of issues. For starters, Plasmids are pitched as a sort of flexible magic system, where each power can fulfill multiple roles. But this concept never goes beyond a skin-deep level of depth. The Shock Plasmid can be used to open doors, temporarily paralyze enemies, make turrets susceptible to hacking, and electrify standing water. It's clear that this Plasmid had the most thought put into it, since the environment takes place in a crumbling underwater utopia. Luring enemies into puddles of water and then zapping them makes for the kind of emergent gameplay that players use to describe immersive sims. Until you realize that this isn't emergent gameplay at all. It's prescribed gameplay. Water exists where the developers want it to exist. This would be a more interesting mechanic if you could break apart the environment and allow water to flood in, and then electrify the water. But then, that would make Bioshock a more interesting game. The next Plasmid, Incinerate, can melt ice, set enemies on fire, and ignite oil spills. This functions almost identical to the Shock Plasmid, just with a red color and it doesn't aid in hacking. From there, the depth evaporates and Plasmids become strictly one-dimensional. The Ice Plasmid freezes enemies and nothing else. There's one that fires bees that damage over time. There's a Plasmid solely dedicated to hypnotizing Big Daddies, who will temporarily defend you from enemies. Not sure why I would waste a slot on this when you need to kill Big Daddies to get Adam from the Little Sisters, and this plasmid doesn't aid with that. The rest of the plasmids all function in similar one-dimensional ways, to the point where they're used as more of a novelty than anything else. Why summon a decoy to distract enemies when I can just set them on fire and shoot them? This decoy plasmid would make sense if ammo were scarce and I found myself in situations where I needed to sneak past enemies, but that isn't the case. Ammo is beyond plentiful. The game acts like you have a choice between all these plasmids, when really, it's just fire, shock, telekinesis, and 3 just to mess around with in niche circumstances. Another example of fake choice is the morality system. Harvesting Little Sisters provides immediate access to 160 Adam, while rescuing them provides immediate access to 80. But rescuing 3 sisters provides you with a gift of 200 Adam the next time you visit a Gatherer's Garden, which means saving 3 Little Sisters versus harvesting 3 is a difference of just 40 Adam, which is insignificant. This system would make more sense if you could make immediate use of the Adam you gather, but since you need to be at a Gatherer's Garden to spend it, and that's where you get the bonus Adam from rescuing Little Sisters anyway, the difference doesn't matter. Likewise, your decision to harvest versus rescue affects the ending in the worst possible way, just a cutscene change. Harvesting Little Sisters means you're so evil that you steal nuclear warheads to take over the world. Saving them means they go to college, have children, and then stay by your side as you grow old. It's elementary tier writing. There are no gameplay repercussions for your actions. You don't fight a different boss or experience plot changes, just a brief narrated cutscene at the end. If you harvest 2 or more Little Sisters and rescue the rest, the narration is the same as if you killed all of them, just solemn as opposed to angry. But if you harvest just 1, you still get the happy ending. Harvesting 1 Little Sister makes you an angel, harvesting 2 or more makes you a nuclear terrorist. Bioshock and other modern games with morality systems portray the extreme ends of the scale, making you decide between good and evil, never providing you with thought-provoking moral choices. It's either Jesus Christ or Hitler. In Fallout 3, you have a choice to either detonate a nuclear bomb and flatten a city for a couple of bucks, or disarm it and get a free house, or just walk away and the quest will remain open in perpetuity. How is this a moral choice? You leave your sheltered life from inside a vault and decide to blow up a city that same day? It's laughable how this is considered acceptable writing in the video game industry. Why are these morality systems so reductive? Because of accessibility. They need to be easy to parse because players are conditioned to accept that red means stop, green means go.
Let's try some word association. First word, ambrosia.
Faced with any sort of critical thinking, and the modern player gets upset, look no further than the System Shock remake to see critics bemoan that the game feels dated or is too faithful to the original. The problem isn't that this gameplay is dated, it's that gamers are conditioned by hand-holding conveniences. In the 80s and 90s, beating games was a question. Can I beat this game? Rarely is that question asked for modern games. The answer is presumed yes. There's no room for experimentation or discovery. Everything is spelled out. This is why map markers and tutorials are so prevalent. People got used to these imperceptibly over time, and now we expect them. Focus tests have no place in creative expression because they steer artists away from their personal beliefs and towards the beliefs of the public. The same applies to any sort of consultation group. At what point will developers stop to ask themselves, am I a free thinker or a robot? Am I making what I want to make or what someone is telling me to make? Because if the answer is anything other than making what you want, then you're not making art, you're making a product.
Well, I appreciate the organic quality of your work, and I was like, well, how the fuck do I make money doing this?
And for creative individuals out there worried that AI or machine learning will take your job, you don't need to worry if you're an artist. These machines can't invent, they can only do what they're told. But if you're in the business of making products and doing what others ask of you, just following the trends of popular culture, the future doesn't look too bright.